So growing up with radical Islam and seeing younger people gravitate towards Islam, you ask the question why. How does that happen? Why does that happen? It's because Islam is much more muscular and gets to say what it wants to say because it's Islamophobic to question it, right, in inverted commas. It was certainly more muscular than a British identity. It's certainly more muscular than Christianity has been. And so I grew up in that realm, and you start to get to grips with, okay, well, it's one thing that this is an issue that we have on our shores, but now we're importing all of these, millions of people who already come, laden with this ideology already in their hearts and as part of the cultures of where they come from. Well, that's a recipe for disaster.
So do you think that the highest organization, which has not only been bringing in immigrants from Afghanistan, but also across the southern border now from God knows where in the Middle East and China, do you think that they, and of course they're getting government money for doing this, are these organizations doing the country a favor? The resettlement, the refugee resettlement.
Yeah, no, this is the usurpation of Western society and Western civilization. It's the knowing usurpation of it. Honestly, if you were to press me on this, I would say that a lot of what these people are doing is treasonous, quite frankly. They are presiding over a situation where the nation state will necessarily be destroyed as a result of their actions. And the worst part of this all, of course, is that we as taxpayers are forced to underwrite a lot of these organizations, right? Whether they're United Nations-based organizations, whether they're NGOs, whether they're open society foundations or whatever, so much government money, and there's no such thing as government money, it's taxpayer money, goes into subsidizing this stuff. And what is it subsidizing? The people's own destruction.
Tommy Robinson's in prison. Is it a blasphemy law or an unwritten blasphemy law that he's violated? Why is he suffering so? He's being punished so.
Yeah, well, Tommy Robinson's being punished because of who he is and what he represents. Tommy Robinson actually represents and much as the establishment hate it, represents a significant chunk of working class Brits who have actually seen, not just the demographics around their neighborhoods change, not just seen the culture change in their own societies. They've seen now we didn't even get to talk about this, but the mass rape of young white women across dozens of British cities since the early 2000s, and a policing society that didn't want to address it. It was too touchy. And Tommy Robinson is an inconvenient person as far as the British political establishment is concerned because he's well spoken, he knows how to organise, he puts people out on the street, and more than anything, they sneer at him because he speaks with a working class accent and he speaks for working class people. And I'm not saying that Tommy Robinson is, the be-all and end-all of the anti-establishment fervour that is coming to pass, all across Europe, especially in the United Kingdom. But what he does is he represents a very, very particular subset of people that the establishment just wishes would go away.
Yeah. On the flip side of that, how much has this Islamic imperialism permeated the British government? And I mean that, I guess it's the House of Commons, mostly?
Well, yeah, massively so. Don't forget we have a Muslim mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who has possibly been, easily been the worst mayor of London ever. Crime rates are through the roof. The city is struggling. It's on its knees. But also, look, you had very recently a member of the House of Commons, a Muslim member of the House of Commons, who was making excuses for first cousin marriage in the United Kingdom. He says it's part and parcel of these communities. It keeps them strong and keeps them together. What he's talking about is a health crisis that is occurring in predominantly Pakistani and Bangladeshi communities in the United Kingdom, and he's championing it. And so when you ask if it's permeated at every level, and it's permeated to a point where even when this guy says it, yes, it gets some headlines, but it doesn't get the outrage that you think it should get because everybody's too afraid to deal with it.
Yeah. But to what extent does it influence, I'll say, UK policy as an example, but also US policy now in the final month of the Democrat administration? They're bending over backwards to throw billions of dollars at Iran. And if you look in and see these Maher Bitar in positions of national security advisory. It seems, and this seems oblique, people opaque to the public, that they don't know that within both the British but also in the U.S. administration, there's a very pro-Islamism that's not only necessarily because of bribery.
Yeah, that's right. And look, lots of different levels it's manifested because of different things. So at the university and college level, the Saudis, for I would say between about 2005, maybe a bit earlier, and at least 2015, were pouring money into what they called Islamic chairs at college campuses, and that they would, proselytize to the young people from there. At the other level, of course, that you're talking about is, of course, it affects everything that goes on in our foreign office, our equivalent of the State Department. It impacts everything in terms of NGO funding that goes on out there, and of course, it impacts how the government deals with, the largest state sponsors of terrorism in the world, in the form of the Qataris and the Iranians. It has left not just the United Kingdom much weaker as a result, it's left our allies much weaker as a result, and it does nothing for the people of these nations who are being oppressed by their governments and their regimes that we keep funding them. So it's inequity on inequity that is being built as a result of mass migration.
So just this week, Washington issued a special report about Islamophobia. When I see the news, it's Muslims who are demonstrating against Jews in the streets. It's Muslims who are graffitiing and on the campuses, but Islamophobia seems to have taken and in the same light that Britain has not an official blasphemy law, but a taboo on speaking against this way. And a fellow named Tahir Ali, for instance, is an MP. Now, it seems like, and isn't there a movement to criminalize certain criticisms of Islamism that would inhibit challenging global politics? Yeah,
so the push for Islamophobia, blasphemy laws, started a long time ago, started with the Muslim Brotherhood, and has become an extremely mainstream thing over the last decade plus. They are absolutely attempting to criminalize what you just said was certain elements of Islamism. No, they are attempting to criminalize any criticism of anything to do with Islam. That's much further and much more nefarious. I'm a free speech maximalist. I think you can level criticism at just about anything, well, frankly anything, and I think if you do it in a way that is non-violent, in a way that is constructive, that actually helps society, right? It's a very British thing actually to come to blows over issues. Sometimes we confect arguments because we're trying to sharpen our swords, sharpen our rhetorical swords. But what we're doing now is we're shutting down conversation so as to appease certain groups and certain people. Why? Because at the end of the day, what British civil society, especially government, especially policing across the country, what they're really worried about is what they call civil disorder and civil unrest. So what they're really doing is they're saying, right, we're going to create a protected class of people here because we are fearful of their aggression. Well, what at that point, you're basically saying you've lost a rhetorical war.
More than a rhetorical war, maybe even a societal war.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you have been on the losing side of this argument in the United Kingdom, and indeed in many places across Europe. Now, what's really interesting is actually the French, for as bad as they've had mass migration, they still grip onto this. The French people still grip onto their secularism argument. Secularism in the state, secularism in schools, having that separation. We have kind of shied away from that and gone, well, okay. There's this huge thing in the United Kingdom over the last 10 years about Islamic schools. Well, what are they teaching? How are they treating their students? And who oversees the curriculums at these places? Actually, nobody. And they're getting away with teaching hardline Sharia values with the state underwriting these schools, and nobody's doing anything about it. Well, how are you going to have a situation like that and then expect these people to go off and be, British people in British society? You're not, and that's not the point. Right?
Will there be discrimination then against Christians and Jews based on Islamic theology?
Oh yeah, I mean you've already started to see that. You've started to see that all across Europe. You may not say this, you may not level criticism, whatever. Listen, I was ostracized from most mainstream media networks in my own country when I wrote my 2017 book No-Go Zones. That was a no-go zone for them. That I, as a former Muslim, by the way, even, was writing this sort of thing. I was due to speak in a committee room in the Houses of Parliament one year, and a member of Parliament, a Conservative member of Parliament, had me removed from the premises because she said I was, quote unquote, an Islamophobe. So you're getting to this point now where a British citizen who is assimilated, who has done everything right in his life, never fallen foul of the law, anything like that, is being kicked out of his own Parliament, where I was invited to speak because I dare say, I mean, if you read that book, it's mild critiques in the grand scheme of things, about Islamic migration into the Western world, because no publisher would publish anything more than that,
Right. Is there a law coming in the UK, you think, that will criminalize this kind of criticism, or even mention in a defamatory term of the theology behind the politics of Islamic imperialism?
Yeah, certainly every year you see the beginnings of this in the legislative process. Somebody will always try and put forward a bill and try and criminalize any criticism of Islam. The problem that they have is that this is just such a wildly, increasingly unpopular concept now. With all of the anti-woke stuff that has happened, people are much more interested in free speech as a general concept. So actually, when you talk about the Red-Green alliance over the years, the left alliance with Islam, actually it turns out that it might have been hurting both of their causes all along. Because now people are fed up of what they were getting from the red side of things. They're now fed up of what they're getting from the green side of things too. Yeah.
But in the same way that criticism of Obama was taboo, it wasn't illegal. Criticism of the COVID policy, the lockdowns, even in the state of California, you couldn't criticize the government or Fauci, certainly, or you'd be socially ostracized. How might this taboo, this social pariahifying, influence the Associated Press and Reuters, who are based in Camden Town and are writing for the world, and their self-censorship will skew the way that situations are reported?
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be no greater example, I think, than the BBC. The BBC is a £5 billion a year organisation that is run because the government forces people to buy a licence to watch television. If you don't, you can be prosecuted as a result. So you're funding a media outlet by coercion. And then that media outlet is being run by people who think that you should never be able to criticize Islam, that you should never be able to speak out against mass migration, that Israel is necessarily the bad guy in every single scenario, regardless of any context, regardless of any claim. I mean, the BBC has been probably the greatest fake news peddler on a global scale for decades now, and it eclipses CNN, it eclipses the Associated Press, because the BBC, as far as people who are watching, in the Middle East are concerned, or in Asia, or in Africa, the BBC still has this air of legitimacy, and it has that, hundreds years old or 100-year-old identity behind it. But actually what it is now is nothing like it was ever envisioned to be. The